This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, and you are listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast. I'm your co-host, Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer here at the Diocese of Arlington. So this is our third originally created podcast, but we've been posting a lot of the bishop's 1-minute radio spots that often aired on WTOP, as well as some of his homilies and messages that you can find on our YouTube channel. We run that audio on the podcast as well. And before we get started, I want to remind everybody, please, if you can, go whatever software it is that you're listening to, iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, please go and write a review and rate this podcast. It's a great way to show your support for it, but it's also a good way for other people to see what it is you like about the podcast that might encourage them to listen to it as well. And here's our host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, how are you?
Hello, Billy. Great to be back with you here.
Very good. So kind of getting right into it, the last time we recorded, we were getting up from the recording, and you saw a story on your phone that obviously took us back, and we had just finished it, so it wasn't addressed in that podcast, but it was the horrible shooting in Parkland, Florida. Talk a little bit about what your reaction was to that.
Yes, I'm sure, like all of our listeners and people across our country, just complete sadness, learning that innocent lives were taken in such a horrific way. It made, I know myself, and I'm sure all of our listeners, just pause, first of all, in prayer, praying for those who were killed, and certainly for their families and friends and classmates. Cannot even imagine what that experience must have been for them, and our continued prayers are essential and needed. And sometimes we feel helpless in the midst of such evil, in the midst of such tragedy, but we're not helpless. All of us can do something, and certainly the prayers that we offer to God on the behalf of those in need and those who have suffered and lost lives is a very special way to participate in the healing process.
So when you see something like this, a lot of people have had reactions. They've been calling for public policy changes. They've been asking for changes with regard to mental health policy and all these things. When you look at it as a pastor, how do you kind of view a tragedy like this, and what the appropriate response might be?
Well, that's a very good distinction you just made. I will talk about this issue as a pastor, not as an elected or public official or politician, but as a pastor. And as a pastor, what must be emphasized and highlighted more than ever is the call for us, the gospel mandate, that all of human life is revered and protected. All of human life. So what happened in Parkland and so tragically in other schools, this has to come to an end. This has to change. Something has to be transformed here. And I know we're protecting two goods. We're certainly protecting the right for life, which is always the priority. But we also know there's a Second Amendment that has to be protected also. Now, how you do that and how you enact laws that do both, that's up to those who have expertise, the ones we entrust with that responsibility. So we're praying for them also, that they are given guidance and wisdom of how to do that. But I think all of our listeners, I'm sure, would emphasize what I'm saying. We know this can't go on. We can't go on with business as usual here. This is one shooting, one life loss is unacceptable. But look what has happened in recent days. So we pray for all those and trust with that responsibility. But what I also think has to change is the way we go about talking about these issues. Everyone has ideas and opinions and strong opinions, and that's fine. I know there was recently a forum at the White House, which I actually thought was very good. In the room, there were some very varied opinions on how we bring about this change I just talked about. And there was disagreement in the room, and there was passion, and there was hurt, and there was anger. But people were actually listening to one another, putting it all on the table. And when we do that and work together and collaborate, we have a much better chance of doing what's best for society. So let's hope and pray that's the direction we're moving forward in.
One thing I've noticed, because I saw that same forum that you're referring to, it seems like because our primary means of communication about important and sensitive topics is the internet and social media, it kind of dehumanizes the person with this other opinion. And yet if you were talking to this person, we would never talk the way that sometimes we see online.
That connectedness, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
It's forgetting that human dignity. It's more apparent when you're sitting across from the person or if they're in the same room. You naturally want to respect that person. But when they're just a profile on a social media account, it's easier to hate them. It's easier to attack them. But I think maybe forums like that bring people together could be a very healing way to discuss complicated and very hurtful issues. Obviously, life is on the line with some of these issues. But the way they interact with each other can transform, because it doesn't just apply to this issue. It applies to any public issue, any issue with public policy implications. The way we talk to each other has to change.
I'm encouraging all the faithful and all of our parishes to continue to include in our prayers, especially when we gather for Mass, this intention of the eradication of all such violence and evil in our midst.
So on a more positive note, you've recently had 2 rites of election held at parishes. So there's nearly 500 Catholics who are going to be received into full communion on Easter from our diocese alone. We've got 290 candidates and 198 catechumens from 32 parishes. So for my first question is, what's your reaction to this? And the second question is, what's the difference between a candidate and a catechumen?
Right, yes. So a catechumen has not yet been baptized, so they will come into the fullness of life in the church through baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. Candidates have been baptized and will come into full communion in the church through confirmation and Eucharist. And we have a ceremony called the Rite of Election, which I celebrated this past weekend with some candidates and catechumens present, and then again this next weekend. And to see such a love for the one holy Catholic and Apostolic faith, and to see the joy of the people who are preparing through the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults, to see their joy and to see how they are accompanied by spouses and children and fellow parishioners is just so uplifting. I said to the catechumens and candidates who gathered this past week, I said, I had hoped that we had time for you all to tell me your stories. Because people are at various ages. Some older, some younger, some in between. And say, how is it that finally at this point, God has led you to this moment in your life to ask for baptism, to ask for confirmation and Eucharist? And you can see them looking at one another because the stories are amazing. But what they all have in common is that it was the Lord who has chosen them. It was the Lord who led them to this beautiful moment and to an Easter. Like they'll have an Easter like no other, but it's the Lord and His divine plan, so active and working in their lives. So, but how blessed are we in the diocese to be welcoming at Easter so many our newest members to our Catholic Church.
And 500, nearly 500, just short of that. That's an amazing number.
It is amazing.
That's great. So there are 2 days coming up where the Holy Father and the U.S. Bishops' Conference are asking for people to speak out or to pray. The first is the National Catholic Call-In Day for Dreamers. It's on February 26th. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that the U.S. bishops are asking for?
Yes, it's a day where Catholics throughout the nation are being asked to call their elected officials, federal officials, requesting legislation that protects dreamers from deportation. So again, what we're talking about here is the dignity of human persons, the dignity of family life, the respect owed, and to find a way where we protect separation of family, to protect these young people who came to our country at a very early age. And I think we all understand, we all talk about the need for security and protection, yes, but we all within our deepest part of our hearts know something has to be done to help these dreamers. And so we're saying, well, what we always say, don't keep your faith to yourself. You have to bring your faith into the public arena. You have to be an advocate for what is good and what is just. And so the Conference of Bishops has asked all Catholics to call their federal officials on February the 26th, looking to enact legislation that avoids any damage to existing protections for families and unaccompanied minors.
And it seems like, especially in this area, people are very aware of D.C. because a lot of folks from our diocese work in D.C. But it's sometimes surprising to me because the elected officials sometimes only hear from advocacy groups. So they always wonder who really cares about this issue from a particular district or wherever it might be. So when people call in, that means something, because that's not an advocacy group where that's what they're paid to do. They exist to serve this role. But when individuals start calling, just parishioners from the pews start calling their elected officials take note, because that person didn't have to call.
And what many of our listeners probably know is that, and it's counted. Mm-hmm. Each call is counted, and so at the end of a day or whatever, the officials are saying, "Here's how many people called your office." So you talk about the power of persuasion. Each call will make a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you would like to make that call and you want to find out more, go to arlingtondiocese.org. We've got a link there where you can get more information so you can make that call, and also information about what it is that the U.S. Bishops Conference is advocating for. So you can speak with the information, the resources about dreamers and about the immigration system that we're most concerned about. So, Bishop, the next one is actually sooner. It's February 23rd, is the Day of Prayer for Peace for those in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. The Holy Father has called for this, so this is a global call. What is this one all about?
And actually, we're taping it, this segment, on the 22nd, so actually it's tomorrow.
Yes, that's true.
The 23rd. And but again, it's ongoing, too. Mm-hmm. Pope Francis has invited Catholics around the world, Billy, to participate in a day of prayer and fasting for peace on Friday, February 23rd. That's the Friday of the first week of Lent, as we know. And it's in order to pray for the tragic prolonging of conflicts in various parts of the world, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. And, when you hear some of the horrific stories and events, we can see why the Holy Father is asking for this urgency, with a sense of urgency, for this prayer. I mean, just in December, 15 UN peacekeepers were killed in December.
In the Congo, yeah.
In the Congo, yeah. And so that's very, very sad. We know that in January, people traveling to Mass were shot by security forces, and the stories just go on. In South Sudan, a fierce and violent war right since 2013. Exactly. And so this prayer for peace is a universal call that the Holy Father has asked us to embrace.
Very good. So for folks that would like to learn more about this, if you go to usccb.org, there are resources there where you can learn, pray, and share for both of these issues, both in the Congo as well as in South Sudan. Again, the violence and the unrest that have been there for a long time, but it is really ramped up in the Congo, and that's why the Holy Father is calling us to this. And in the South Sudan, a third of the population has been displaced from the civil war there that's been going on, like Bishop Burbidge said, since 2013. They really need our prayers, and prayers and fasting are what are being asked for, but you can learn a lot more by going to usccb.org. So, Bishop, Virginia Vespers was just a couple weeks ago. It's an opportunity where you and the newly installed Bishop Barry Nestout in the Diocese of Richmond came together, calling people, elected officials and the faithful alike, to pray for the church, but also obviously for our elected officials who are entrusted with not only our votes, but obviously important issues that have humanitarian impact, that impact civil rights, that impact the right to life, marriage, religious liberty, all of these important issues. What are some of the issues that you want parishioners to be most engaged in?
First of all, the Virginia Catholic Conference. One of a great gift in our diocese, and that I am finding absolutely amazing, is the fact that this partnership with the Diocese of Arlington and Richmond, we have invested in staffing what we call the Virginia Catholic Conference, which is an incredible team that works extremely hard in staying vigilant and current with legislative issues and bills that are surfacing. And they happen at such a rapid pace, and sometimes at an unpredictable time,
right.
That unless you are vigilant, unless someone's watching, we could be caught off guard to enact laws that we would say are just and good for society, consistent with our moral values. So the Virginia Catholic Conference is a team of people that stay on top of these legislative issues, but also represent our views and our opinions to the various officials. So they're constantly engaging them, and not only telling them what we're against, and telling them what we're for, and many times helping them to understand that there's common ground here with the Catholic Church. For example, healthcare expansion. Of course, we know that healthcare expansion for all people, especially those who are without it, and the poor, consistent again with our moral convictions and our moral beliefs. But what are laws that might expand that care, that compassion to other people? Education is always an issue that we're talking about and that we must monitor. One of the big issues in our state right now is pre-K students. There are about 7,500 pre-K students that are not able to get the funding necessary for pre-K education. So our pre-K students in low-income families, how can we make available to them the Virginia Scholarship Tax Credit Program, for example? And so it's a very technical issue in a sense, but we know that we have to do more to make this a resource, not only for the students, but of course for their parents and their families.
And it's so reasonable to advocate for something where children from disadvantaged backgrounds or from poor households are able to go to better schools because of a tax credit program. It levels the playing field in so many ways and gives opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be there.
Correct.
It seems like whenever that issue is raised with folks and it's discussed, a lot of people really get it. They really seem to appreciate it and support it because it is for these kids who would otherwise not have necessarily the education that they need. Or they're in an area with overcrowded public schools, and the public schools have legitimate challenges as well. But this program, I know from speaking with the Virginia Catholic Conference, would not negatively impact public education either.
Exactly, which is sometimes an argument.
Exactly. It relieves a burden from them and gives opportunities for these kids to go to other places. And I know dear to your heart are issues related to life and marriage. You're a big advocate for families and legislation such as that. For those who want to keep up with the legislative priorities of the bishop and the policies that they're really advocating for through the Virginia Catholic Conference, a great collaboration between these two dioceses, go to vacatholic.org. You can do two things there that I think are really important, and Bishop, you might want to speak to these. One, you can find out how to contact your legislator. So it's got a tool there where you just enter your address and it tells you who your legislators are so you can contact them. But there's also an email network that you can submit your email and you can be updated. So you don't have to come checking in. We'll let you know when important issues are coming up and we need your help. So those are the two best things you can do at vacatholic.org.
And to our listeners, if I could put a strong word of encouragement to really become familiar with the Virginia Catholic Conference and how you can stay current on these issues and be a voice and to be an advocate. We have a great organization. I think honestly, in the diocese, I think we have to do a better job of involving more people here in the Virginia Catholic Conference. As you can tell, I'm a big supporter because I see directly the benefits of this kind of work being done on our behalf.
And the rights of the faithful and the church are defended through organizations like this. So again, to join that email network that Bishop Burbidge is encouraging you to go sign up for, or to contact your local legislator, go to vacatholic.org.
And just to inform our listeners, the Virginia Catholic Conference is under the leadership of the bishops.
Exactly.
Of Bishop Nassau and myself.
Right. A headline very very new, I think it was just yesterday, news that Billy Graham, the famous evangelical preacher, died at the age of 99.
God bless him, right?
Absolutely.
99 years.
Yeah. What was your initial reaction? You being a bishop, you're bishop of a geography. Within that are Protestant brothers and sisters, many of whom really loved Billy Graham and followed a lot of his work. What was your thought when you saw that he had passed?
We just thought of what a blessed life. Not only that God gave him so many years on this earth, but the privilege of bringing the message of Christ to so many people. I was just thinking, how many hearts and lives with God's grace that he helped to transform. You think of those images of the rallies and the stadiums and how this man just through very beautiful and powerful, authentic, sincere preaching was just so effective and loved by so many, and a man of great integrity and a great witness. And I'm sure we are praying for his eternal rest, but also praying for his family at this time. And I think any preacher, myself included, could go back and look at some of those tapes and probably find a few good lessons to learn.
Very good. And you can only imagine how many people he reached, not just in those big rallies, but people that read his books and listened to tapes, heard him on the radio. His outreach was enormous, he and his ministry were very ambitious with digital media and using new tools, kind of like we're doing here. He really saw that and wanted to utilize those opportunities. And his message, maybe part of what made him so popular was his message was not divisive, but it was a message everybody could appreciate. It was a simple message of the gospel. He didn't get into theological complexities and things like that, but a message of hope and Christ's love and his call for your life, drawing you to more.
Right.
Yeah. So we have some questions from the faithful. We asked and they responded. Are you ready for a few of these?
I'm ready to go. We'll consider the lightning round.
All right. We'll fire through a few of these, and then as time allows, and then we'll save some of these maybe for the next.
But as you mentioned, I welcome this. I truly do. I hope our listeners know that. I want to know what's on your mind, and if I can answer a question or help you in any way or clarify anything, very happy and willing to do that.
And for those who do want to send in questions, you can either send them to us on social media. We'll post requests for those, and you can just comment them there. If you want to do it more privately, you can just email communications@arlingtondiocese.org. We ask that you just include at least your first name and your parish if you have one, but if you don't, we'll still take the questions.
All right, start with an easy one.
All right, let's start with an easy one. So Jackie from St. Leo the Great in Fairfax had a number of questions about the process for becoming a bishop, how you're nominated, and how long does that process take? And then also, do you have any input when you're assigned to a new diocese? Are you able to say, I'd like to go to Honolulu. I'd like to be I feel this pastoral need to serve the people of Honolulu.
It's very unique in the Catholic Church, where the selection and naming of a bishop does not involve directly the candidate.
Most jobs you have to at least ask for it.
Even in other denominations, when bishops are being selected, they're interviewed. They have to give homilies in front of a board. They're really tested. In our process, the candidate is not directly involved. But don't get me wrong, it's a thorough process of collaboration where other bishops, priests, religious, laity are consulted. It's a confidential process. But when candidates are being considered, the Church, in her wisdom, seeks the input of those who may know the candidate, and a significant questionnaire is given to them. And then whoever fills those questionnaires out are told that they're under the pontifical secret, it's called. Like, in other words, you cannot tell anyone. Wow. So, for example, when I was named a bishop, the approximate number would be probably about 70 people are consulted.
70.
Yeah,
Wow.
70.
Wow.
That's probably the average. Now, can honestly say I have good friends who know how to keep secrets. Because I still, to this day, would not be able to tell you one person who filled out that questionnaire.
Wow.
And so it's a very consultative process. And then ultimately recommendations are given to the Apostolic Nuncio. He has his own. He sends it over to the Congregation of Bishops for Rome. And then the names are presented to the Holy Father, directly to him by the head of the Congregation for Bishops. And then the approval is given. So then when the Apostolic Nuncio calls you to tell you that you've been named a bishop or they've been named to a bishop of a diocese, he begins by saying, the Holy Father has named you. In other words, it's already decided. So at that point...
resistance is futile.
Right. At that point, you better trust that God and his Holy Spirit have led this process, which of course is true.
Right.
Yeah.
So a bishop is a successor of the apostles. That's what we believe in the Catholic faith. Is the process the same whether you're ordained an auxiliary bishop or if you're ordained the bishop of a diocese?
Same process.
Okay. And an auxiliary bishop serves under like an archbishop. So
Right.
you were an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
Right. I was that for 4 years. Okay. And then I got named the bishop of Raleigh and then a bishop of Arlington. And the phone call is always the same. You know, the Apostolic Nuncio calls and I have very good news for you.
And the process
then you know
same?
You're in trouble. Now I get
It's good for them, but maybe not for you.
No, couldn't be more happy.
That's great. So Rod at St. John's in Warrenton asked a very similar question to Cassie at St. Timothy's in Chantilly. Rod asked, what is your morning routine? And Cassie asked, what does your daily routine look like? Are there any rituals or habits that you consider critical to function at full capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that in the life of the priest and the life of the bishop, that morning is so crucial. The morning has to be devoted to God. And that's what we promise. That's what we owe the church. So in that morning hour is when you give that hour at least to God in prayer and by being with the Lord and saying your breviary, your liturgy, the hours, the prayers you promise to say. But that first hour is dedicated to God. And so part of my morning is also I think it's very important, at least for me, to find the time in the morning to exercise. I think it's so important that we stay strong in body and spirit. And I know, and everyone's different. Everyone has a different routine. But I know if I don't exercise in the morning, I'm not going to do it at the end of the day. Now, other people, it's just the opposite, and that's fine. But for me, those two things, I have to get in early in the morning, the prayer and the exercise. And then the day, like all of our listeners, the day it takes off, right? Mm-hmm. Here we go. It's a rapid pace. And that's what I love about my ministry. And each day is different. Sometimes it involves the administrative part of my job. Sometimes, hopefully more frequently, the going out to parishes and to schools and visits and celebrating the sacraments. But one of the great joys of being a priest and a bishop, no day, to one part of that question, no day is ever routine. Yeah. No day. And then, of course, it's so essential to conclude the day with a strong examination of conscience. Where did I see God in my life today? Where did I fail God today? And where do I need help to do better tomorrow? And so, not everyone's called to devote that same amount of time, but I think all of our listeners, I would strongly encourage you to at least give a little bit of time to prayer in the morning. Just don't jump on that treadmill and get running out the door. Just make some sort of morning offering and some sort of examination of conscience at the end of the day, just to balance your busy lives in that way.
Now, you're such an active person. Anyone that goes on the website and sees your public calendar knows you fill your calendar. Is it hard for you sometimes not to put your feet on the floor and just start running? Is it hard for you to step back and take that hour first?
No, it's not hard, because I think I've learned from experience that it doesn't work the other way. I've tried it the other way.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. You end up not being at your best, and life gets a little bit chaotic, and you lose a sense of serenity. So maybe I've learned the hard way.
All right. Great question, Cassie and Rod. That was really good. Helen from St. Andrews in Clifton, where I was married, coincidentally. Why do you ask for no music or singing during the anointing at confirmations?
Oh, that's a very good question. She must have read my confirmation directives here. Well, the reason is because the focus should be on the administering of the sacrament. We don't need tons of distraction. There's an act going on, a very reverent act, the anointing, and be sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit. One by one, and that should not be overpowered by music or by singing. There's no need for it. And I know it's probably uncomfortable sometimes for people to have a little bit of silence while that's going on. It's a lot easier. Like when we go to stadiums, it seems like you can't even enjoy an intermission anymore. Everything has to be filled every second. But in the sacrament of confirmation, it's beautiful for people just to allow the sacrament to take place. We don't need to be distracted. Now, there's some parishes that will do very, 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 very soft music in the background, just instrumental. Mm-hmm. That's okay. But that's why.
Very good, very good. Now you celebrate. I'm going to add my question on this. You celebrate the confirmations at, it seems like almost every parish. Your schedule, you go to so many of these. Why is it important for you to personally do this yourself?
Well, the bishop is the ordinary minister of the sacrament, so others can confirm, but that's not the ordinary circumstances. I can delegate, but the ordinary minister of the sacrament is the bishop, and so our students are preparing for years for this. And to get to be with them, to get to be with their parents and families, their grandparents who travel from all parts of the country to be here is wonderful. Now, I'm very blessed in our diocese where I have the assistance of Bishop Laverty and Archbishop Broglio, and the auxiliaries sometimes from the military services will assist. So in our diocese, we're still very blessed that our students are being confirmed by the ordinary minister of confirmation, the bishop.
Very good. All right, so I think we'll do one more, and then we'll save John from the Basilica of St. Mary's and Kateri from St. Raymond's. We'll hold yours for next time, but we'll get to these, and then we have some others we'll have to save for next time too. But this one's good. Chris from St. Philip says, "Is the bishop a trained or certified basketball official?" You might have to explain the context for those who don't know.
Yeah, that's funny. We had a vocation day with our seminarians and some high school students. We were vocation talks and prayer and together. But part of the event was a basketball game between the high school students and the seminarians. And so along with one of our priests and another gentleman, I refereed the game. I used to do it, not as I would say a trained person, but I used to referee in an umpire in my past life. And so I put on the striped shirt once again, and I realized as soon as that ball was tipped off that seminarians and high school students are very competitive young men. And I was no longer the bishop. Yeah. I was the referee who got the dirty look as soon as I made the first call.
Maybe Chris at St. Philip's has a city league he wants you to start helping out with or something. Bishop, before we wrap up, is there anything you wanted to say? And then if you would also finish with a blessing for us.
Sure. So we are certainly continuing this Lenten journey, a time of prayer and fasting and almsgiving. I encourage our listeners to stay fervent in their Lenten promises and all that they offer to God. If for some reason their Lent did not get off to as good of a start as they hoped and already are not as filled with that fervor they once were on Ash Wednesday, don't give up. They just get right back on track. This is a long journey, and don't get frustrated. God's there to forgive you if you need His forgiveness in the sacrament of penance, or just as to take some time aside to say, all right, let me get back to what I promised. Let me renew those promises, Lord, and let's keep going forward. So I extend Lenten prayers and wishes and blessings to all of our listeners. And with God's grace, may we continue to walk humbly with our Lord. Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly podcast. Make sure you check out more episodes on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can follow me on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, where I offer spiritual reflections each morning in the gospel and share photos and updates of what is going on in the Diocese of Arlington. Stay up to date with news, event information, inspirational content, and more by subscribing to our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org.